Hi, I am Kimmy with On William Street, and if you are following along and quilting along with our online quilting bee this year, you are eventually going to need to quilt that quilt, and you're going to need some ideas and different ways to do that. So what we're going to do is each month we're also going to share some different ideas and different ways that you can quilt each of these blocks as we go throughout the year. So the first block that we have, of course, is our quarter square triangle star block. And this is a really fun block to do, and the thing I like about this one and some of the techniques and ideas that I'm going to give you is that the shapes are very basic. There's the triangles and there's the squares. So the ideas that I'm going to give as I show some quilting ideas for this block are going to be ones that you could easily use in a lot of other quilt blocks because they're all going to be made of those same shapes. Also, if you notice in the quilt, all of the blocks kind of float. I didn't really put designs that went to the outside and created a definite border on each of the blocks. And what this is going to do is it's going to create kind of a floating, well, the shapes are going to float, but it's going to create a lot of negative space and a lot of a background element. So I will also go ahead and show you kind of a couple different ways you can approach that and deal with those backgrounds. Since it's not really broken up into specific smaller areas, it's going to need to be treated more as one giant overall shape. So I'll show you some different ways that you can kind of break those down and quilt those larger sections as well. Okay, so the first way to kind of approach quilting a block, and this works really well for some of the more traditional blocks, is to go ahead and just fill in the shapes that are there. I'm not going to worry about going outside of them or creating new shapes really. I'm just filling in the shapes that are created through the piecing. So you can see here in this outer block, I've gone ahead and put in a half feather. And I just repeated that in all of the outer blocks, and I've gone ahead and used the outside edges of the spine. And this is just going to make it so that it's easy to fill in the shape. Filling in from here to the smaller point up here is probably the easiest way to do that feather. So that's one of the reasons that I chose to use this outer edge as the spine, and then it just kind of mirrors all the way around the shape. After that, you can come into the little yellow square, and I've decided to go ahead and treat this as one element. So I've gone and done the echo lines all the way around and then just repeated those. But what I've done is I would connect these so that they were lined up, so that they looked as if they were one full element that was connected all the way around. And what that does is that really turns this into a background element and makes this gray square on top really look like it's on top of those yellow squares. Then when I come to the gray square, I've gone ahead and just filled that in with a basic shape. I've done the wishbones here. That really could be anything though. It could be swirls, it could be pebbles, it could be, ribbon candy, whatever elements you like to use as your fill shapes that could fit into that shape. After I've done that, looking at the outside of this, you can see I've gone ahead and quilted the background as if it was a finished square. It didn't have any connection to the rest of the background around it. And so if you had like sashing around it that was a different color, something that definitely framed out this block, these are some different ideas that you can use here. And what I've decided to do is I've gone ahead and put these lines and echoed the straight lines all the way around the outside of the star. And that really makes it so that the star itself is going to stand out. It's going to be like the main focal point of the block, which is what I wanted. Then in the corners, I left these corners open and I went ahead and used the wishbone. Repetition is a really good design element that you can use in quilting. It kind of helps tie everything together, makes everything seem connected. So I definitely recommend, don't feel shy about using some repetition and reusing some of the different elements in all of your different blocks. This next example is also one where I've used the quilt, the piecing, and just filled in the shapes that were created by the piecing. I didn't worry about doing a background on this one though, but just to show you some different options for ways that you can fill in those squares. So I've got the rounded curves here on each of the outer star blocks, and if you have something where you have a really busy print, you're not going to see very much of the quilting. And something like this, it's a little bit simpler. It holds the pieces down, gives some texture, but it's okay that you don't really see those elements because there aren't really specific details that you're looking for in that quilting. And then I've gone ahead and swapped and I put the wishbones here on these outside triangles and then filled in this inside shapes with some lines. Now these obviously would be straight lines. I'm still learning to use my stylus pen on my thing to get the best sketching, but just keep in mind that I would not really try to wave these lines. Those would all just be straight lines and then echoing that center X around to kind of fill in that square there on the inside. So the next one, I've started to kind of move beyond working inside the shapes and creating my own shapes. So you can see the first thing I did here is I put an X
across from corner to corner, and that created a square here, a square here, a square here, and a square here. And I've used those and filled those in as if they were one shape, and I've disregarded the piecing here on this shape. So I put the wishbones here back and forth, and then with the straight lines so that those really stood out as two distinct elements. I could have put the wishbones here and here as well, but they wouldn't have been as obvious that they were quilted differently, so it just kind of depends on the look that you're going for. Then I've gone ahead and put a channel or and echoed here the outside triangle shape, and then I would just fill this in with back and forth lines. And that is definitely going to make this empty spot stand out, and it's going to become a real focal point of the quilt to really give that a nice frame. Again, this is another one where I've shown what you could do in the background as if it was stashed. So I filled in the background to show you some options, and I did go ahead and put in a square behind. And I would probably actually, with this, I would line the square up with this point so that it looks like it's one continual shape, but otherwise I would have to come and fill in some lines here if you can see, if you're following it along. So I would choose to make sure that it was lining up right along that point where those quarter square triangles come together, and then fill in echoing there. And it just does, it gives it a nice, kind of not a true frame, but a nice frame behind, a nice shape that's going to still make that star pop. And then in this border out here, sorry, went ahead and did the wishbones to kind of, again, repeat here, but this would be something, again, you could really put anything you liked in this border. It could be pebbles, it could be swirls, it can be the wishbones, it could be some more feathers, any different elements that you like. This is one example of how to kind of start to breaking up the piecing and not worrying about the shape so much and putting the quilting kind of on top and using it as a little bit more of a design element instead of just filling in those shapes that are there. And in this last one, I've really kind of gone outside the box and disregarded the shapes, the piecing, to show you just kind of how far you can really push this. And first thing I've done is I went ahead and added, and I've not really looked at the triangle so much here, and I've really focused more on this yellow shape and what's going on here, and I went ahead and just put in an echoed box around the outside. Then gone ahead, echoed the same thing on the inside. Put the straight lines here to fill in the green areas. So I have used those shapes somewhat, but not completely. These would just be back and forth lines, and what that's going to do is that's going to really make those recede and become definite background elements. They aren't going to stand out, they're just going to become background spots. And that's going to do the same thing here in the yellow and make this channel, this open area, is going to be a definite visual. You're going to see that, and it's really going to stand out. Then needed something to fill in this inside. Again, it could be swirls, it could be pebbles. I chose a round feather to go ahead and fill this in. So those are just some different ideas and different ways that you can see that you can follow the piecing or completely not follow the piecing to get a whole different look in your quilt block.
So this is going to show some of the different ways that you can approach the background. And when I'm looking at the background, I'm always going to break down the shapes, and then I'm going to find ways to fill those in. I'm not going to try to really approach the whole thing as one element. It's too overwhelming. So you can see some of the different ways that I broke down the shapes. Also, I went ahead and combined some of the different elements, and kind of just filled in the stars a little bit different on this plan as well. So with this one, I just wanted to show you some of the different ways you could break it down. I found some different ways to connect the different points on the stars to create new shapes, and then broke those down and filled those in. So it just gives you some different options and helps you to see things in a little bit different way. So whether you are making a quilt top entirely out of this block, or if you're waiting until the end and doing the sampler quilt, you can go ahead and play with some of these quilting ideas, use them in other blocks as well, or just kind of stash them away for the end. Also, feel free to go to the blog post. You'll be able to print out the images of the finished quilt tops, and that will allow you an opportunity to doodle and sketch and play around and see what you can come up with. So just have fun with it. Like I said, stash them away. Any of the ideas that you sketch up, put them away with your block, so that when you're all done and you put your quilt top together all at the end of the year, you'll already have a huge array of different ideas that you've got, so that you can easily get it finished up and quilted so that you can use it. So we will see you next month with the just a couple weeks with our next block. Don't forget that the next one's going to post the first Wednesday of February is when the next B block will go out. And if you have any questions in the meantime, definitely reach out to us, and make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram and Facebook as always, and we will see you next week.